The gun barrel pressed cold against Eleanor Vaughn's temple as the Boston financier's voice cut through the dusty New Mexico air. "You thought you could run from our agreement? That some frontier cowboy could save you?" Jacob Redford stood frozen 20 feet away, his hand hovering over his holster, knowing one wrong move would end everything they'd built together. But Eleanor's eyes, those same green eyes that had stopped his world on a train platform months ago, held no fear, only defiance. "You want to know what I think, Mr. Whitmore?" she said, her voice steady as granite. "I think you've underestimated what people can become when they find something worth fighting for. Welcome to a story of love found against all odds, where destiny arrives on steam and steel. I'm taking you back to 1882, to a small town called Willow Springs, where a cowboy's simple errand to collect medicine would change 2 lives forever. Follow me to the end of this tale, and don't forget to comment your city below. I love seeing how far these stories travel." The morning Jacob Redford rode into Willow Springs, the desert heat had already begun its slow crawl across the valley, turning the red earth into a shimmering mirror of dust and light. He hadn't wanted to make the journey, 40 miles from his ranch to the nearest town with a proper depot, but his father's cough had worsened through the spring, and Doc Morrison's telegram had been clear. The medicine would arrive on the Tuesday eastbound, and someone needed to be there to collect it. Jacob guided his horse, Tempest, down the main street, past the saloon where piano music already drifted through the batwing doors despite the early hour. The town was coming alive in that particular way frontier settlements did, slowly, reluctantly, like an old dog stretching after a long sleep. Shopkeepers swept their storefronts, sending small clouds of dust into the air that caught the morning light like powdered gold. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm, a metallic heartbeat that seemed to set the pace for everything else. "Morning, Jake," called out Mrs. Patterson from the general store, her gray hair pinned up tight against the heat that would come. "Your pa doing any better?" "Some days are better than others," Jacob replied, tipping his hat. It was the answer he'd been giving for months now, a polite deflection that avoided the truth. Samuel Redford was dying, slowly but surely, his lungs failing him after decades of breathing in trail dust and campfire smoke. The irony wasn't lost on Jacob that a man who'd survived Apache raids, cattle stampedes, and the war between the states might be brought low by something as simple as air. The train platform stood at the eastern edge of town, a wooden structure that seemed both permanent and temporary at once. Like everything else in Willow Springs, the rails stretched away in both directions, disappearing into the heat haze, connecting this small speck of civilization to the wider world in ways that still felt miraculous to men who'd grown up measuring distance by how many days it took to ride somewhere. Jacob tied Tempest to the hitching post and climbed the platform steps, his spurs jangling with each footfall. A small crowd had already gathered, travelers heading east to Santa Fe or beyond, merchants waiting for shipments, curious children whose mothers held them back from the platform edge with firm hands. The station master, a thin man named Elias Cooper, who wore his railroad uniform with the pride of a general, checked his pocket watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. "Running late again?" Jacob asked. "5 minutes," Cooper replied, as if this was a personal affront to his dignity. "The eastbound is always 5 minutes late on Tuesdays. You'd think after running this route for 3 years, they'd account for the grade coming up from Dry Creek." Jacob smiled slightly. In a world where time had once been measured by the sun's arc across the sky, the railroad's obsession with minutes seemed both foreign and oddly comforting. It suggested a kind of order, a belief that the world could be tamed and scheduled, even out here where the desert still held more sway than any timetable. The whistle sounded before the train came into view, a long, lonely wail that echoed off the distant mesas. Then came the rumble, felt through the platform boards before it was heard, a vibration that started in your feet and worked its way up through your bones. The children pressed forward despite their mothers' restraining hands, eyes wide with the excitement that only arriving trains could bring. The locomotive appeared around the bend, black smoke billowing from its stack, the great iron beast announcing its arrival with all the drama of a Shakespearean actor taking the stage. It was the 11:15 from Kansas City, though it was now 11:20, as Cooper would undoubtedly note in his log. The engine rushed past in a blur of steam and steel, the cars following in a rhythmic clatter that gradually slowed as the engineer applied the brakes, sending up sparks that died in the morning air. Medicine shipment for Redford, Jacob told Cooper as the train shuddered to a stop. Doc Morrison wired ahead. Cooper consulted his manifest, running a finger down the list with bureaucratic precision. Car 3. Medical supplies from St. Louis. I'll have Martinez unload it. While Cooper went to oversee the unloading, Jacob found himself watching the passenger cars. The doors opened and people began to emerge, a study in humanity's variety. There were businessmen in city suits already wilting in the heat, their collars too tight for this climate. A family of homesteaders, the children clutching cloth dolls while their parents carried everything they owned in 2 battered trunks. A traveling preacher with a Bible worn soft from handling. Each person stepping onto the platform carried their own story, their own reasons for being here, at this moment, in this place. And then he saw her. She appeared in the doorway of the first-class car, pausing for just a moment before descending. The first thing Jacob noticed was the dress, green silk that seemed to capture and hold the morning light, too fine for Willow Springs, too elegant for anywhere within 100 miles. But it wasn't the dress that stopped him mid-breath. It was the way she moved, with a grace that seemed unconscious, natural, like water flowing downhill. Her hair was the color of chestnuts, pinned up in a style he'd seen in illustrations from back east, revealing the elegant line of her neck. But when she turned, scanning the platform, and their eyes met across the crowd, that was when the world shifted on its axis. Her eyes were green, but not just green. They were the color of sage after rain, deep and complex, holding depths that seemed to go on forever. In that single moment of connection, Jacob felt something fundamental change inside him, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. She held his gaze for perhaps 3 seconds, though it felt like 3 hours, and in her expression, he saw something that matched what he felt. Recognition, though they'd never met. Understanding, though they'd never spoken. A sense of coming home to a place you'd never been. "Sir?" A voice broke through. "Mr. Redford?" Jacob blinked, the spell broken, and turned to find Martinez holding a wooden crate marked with medical stamps. "Your father's medicine, senor." "Right, yes. Thank you." Jacob took the crate, but when he turned back, the woman in green was gone. He scanned the platform frantically, his height giving him an advantage, but she had vanished as completely as if she'd been a mirage. The only evidence she'd been real at all was the lingering scent of lavender in the air and the way his heart was still racing. "Looking for someone?" Cooper asked, returning with his logbook. "There was a woman, in green, from the first-class car." Cooper shrugged. Several passengers disembarked. Couldn't say where they went. "You know how it is. People come, people go. That's what trains are for." Jacob wanted to argue, to explain that this wasn't just people coming and going, that something significant had just happened, something that mattered. But how could he explain what he didn't understand himself? How could he tell Cooper that in the span of 3 seconds, his world had reorganized itself around a woman whose name he didn't know? He carried the medicine crate to where Tempest waited, his mind replaying those 3 seconds over and over. The way the light had caught in her hair, the slight widening of her eyes when they'd met his, the way her lips had parted slightly, as if she too had felt the earth shift beneath her feet. "You're being foolish," he told himself as he secured the crate to his saddle. "You saw a pretty woman at a train station, that's all." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. What had passed between them in that moment was something else entirely. It was the kind of connection poets wrote about and sensible men dismissed, until it happened to them. It was the feeling of finding something you hadn't known you'd lost, of answering a question you hadn't known you'd asked. The ride back to the ranch had never felt longer. The 40 miles stretched out like 40,000, each hoofbeat taking him farther from that platform, from that moment, from her. The medicine crate bumped against Tempest's flank with each step, a reminder of why he'd come to town, of the responsibilities waiting for him at home. His father needed this medicine. The ranch needed tending. The cattle needed moving to fresh pasture before the heat of summer burned away what little grass remained. These were real things, practical things, the things that made up a life, not mysterious women in green silk who appeared and vanished like smoke. The Redford ranch sat in a valley between 2 mesas, sheltered from the worst of the wind but open enough to catch the rain when it came. It had been in the family for 20 years, since Jacob's father had claimed the land after the war, building it up from nothing into something. Not an empire, maybe, but something solid, something real. The main house was adobe, thick walls that stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. The barn was newer, built 5 years ago after a lightning strike had taken the original. There were corrals for the horses, a bunkhouse for the hands, a smokehouse, a spring-fed well that had never run dry even in the worst droughts. Jacob found his father on the porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat, his face gaunt, but his eyes still sharp. Samuel Redford had been a big man once, broad-shouldered and strong, the kind of man who could break a horse or build a house with equal skill. Now he seemed to be shrinking, as if the disease eating at his lungs was hollowing him out from the inside. "Get the medicine?" Samuel asked, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Right here." Jacob carried the crate up the porch steps, setting it down gently. "Doc Morrison says twice daily, with food." "Doc Morrison says a lot of things," Samuel replied, but he was already reaching for the crate, desperate despite his attempt at nonchalance. "Any news from town?" Jacob hesitated. He could mention the woman, the moment on the platform, but what would be the point? His father had enough to worry about without adding his son's romantic foolishness to the list. "Nothing much. Cooper says the railroad's thinking about adding another weekly run." Progress, Samuel said, the word carrying multiple meanings. Progress was bringing more trains, more people, more change to a land that had remained unchanged for centuries. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. That evening, after the medicine had been administered and his father had retired early, as he did most nights now, Jacob sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mesas in shades of red and gold. The ranch hands were finishing their day's work, the sounds of their voices carrying across the yard. Pedro was telling a joke in Spanish that made the others laugh. Tom was arguing about the best way to treat a lame horse. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, the soundtrack of his life. But underneath it all, like a melody he couldn't quite forget, was the memory of green eyes and 3 seconds that had felt like forever. He tried to push it aside, to focus on practical matters. Tomorrow they needed to move the herd to the eastern pasture. The fence along the southern border needed repair before the monsoons came. One of the mares was close to foaling and would need watching. These were the things that mattered, the things that kept a ranch running and a family fed. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw her. The way she'd paused in the doorway of the train car, framed by steam and morning light. The elegant line of her neck. The way her dress had moved when she walked, like water-made fabric. "You don't even know her name," he said aloud to the empty porch. The stars were coming out now, one by one, like candles being lit in a vast cathedral. Out here, away from the gaslight of cities, the night sky was a revelation, a reminder of how small human concerns really were. What did it matter, in the grand scheme of things, that a cowboy had seen a woman at a train station? The stars would continue their ancient dance regardless. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your gut were two different things. And in his gut, Jacob knew that those 3 seconds on the platform had changed something fundamental. It was like a door had been opened that couldn't be closed again, showing him a glimpse of a room he hadn't known existed in the house of his life. Sleep came late and brought dreams of trains and green silk and eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. The next days passed in a blur of routine work, but Jacob found himself making excuses to go to town. The ranch needed supplies. They were low on coffee. One of the horses needed new shoes, and the blacksmith at the ranch wasn't as skilled as the one in town. Each trip, he found himself at the platform when the eastbound arrived, scanning the crowd for a glimpse of green. "You're going to wear a groove in them platform boards," Cooper observed on the 4th such visit. "What is it you're looking for exactly?" Jacob couldn't answer, not honestly. How could he explain that he was looking for a ghost, a dream, a moment that had felt more real than anything in his life before or since? A week passed, then 2. The medicine was helping his father, giving him good days among the bad, days when he could sit a horse for a few hours and survey the land he'd built his life on. On one such day, they rode out to the eastern boundary, where the ranch bordered the open range. "I ever tell you about the first time I saw your mother?" Samuel asked suddenly. Jacob looked over, surprised. His mother had died when he was 12, and his father rarely spoke of her. "No, sir." It was in St. Louis before the war. I was there buying cattle, young and full of myself, thinking I knew everything there was to know about the world. Went to a dance at one of those fancy hotels, the kind with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. And there she was, dancing with some banker's son, looking like an angel in a blue dress. Samuel paused, lost in memory, his eyes focused on something beyond the horizon. The moment I saw her, I knew. Don't ask me how or why, but I knew she was going to change everything. Took me 3 months to convince her to marry me and come out here, to this place that wasn't much more than dirt and dreams at the time. Her family thought she was crazy. Maybe she was. Did you ever regret it? Jacob asked. Coming here, I mean. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Your mother never complained, not once, not even when times were hard. But sometimes I'd catch her looking east toward home, and I'd wonder if I'd taken something from her that I had no right to take. If I'd asked her to give up too much for my dream. She loved you, Jacob said. She did, Samuel agreed. But love doesn't make sacrifice easier, son. It just makes it possible. They rode back in silence, but his father's words echoed in Jacob's mind. Love makes sacrifice possible. But what sacrifice? And for whom? He didn't even know the woman's name, had shared nothing with her but a look. It was madness to be thinking in terms of love and sacrifice. Yet the feeling persisted, grew stronger even. He found himself imagining conversations with her, building whole scenes in his mind. What would her voice sound like? What would make her laugh? What shadows had he glimpsed behind those green eyes in that brief moment of connection? 3 weeks after that first encounter, Jacob was in Thompson's general store, negotiating the price of grain, when she walked in. He knew it was her before he turned around. Something in the air changed, like the atmospheric pressure before a storm. When he did turn, she was standing in the doorway, wearing a simpler dress than before, brown cotton instead of green silk, but no less striking for it. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Their eyes met again, and this time the recognition was undeniable. She smiled slightly, a small upturn of her lips that somehow acknowledged everything that had passed between them on that platform. "Ma'am?" Jacob said, tipping his hat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sir," she replied, and her voice was exactly as he'd imagined it, cultured, melodious, with just a hint of something else, something that suggested depths beneath the polished surface. "Can I help you find something?" Mr. Thompson asked, ever the attentive shopkeeper. "Yes, thank you. I need to inquire about land deeds. I was told you might have information about properties for sale in the area." Land deeds. She wasn't just passing through then. She was looking to stay. Jacob's heart did something complicated in his chest. "Well now," Thompson said, "there's the old Martinez place, been empty for 2 years, and the Hendricks are looking to sell their northern parcel, though it's not much good for farming." "I'm not interested in farming," she said. "I'm looking for ranch land, somewhere with good water access and grazing." Thompson's eyebrows rose. A woman looking to buy ranch land on her own. It was unusual, to say the least. "That's a mighty big undertaking for a— That is, do you have family coming to help work the land?" "I have resources," she said simply, in a tone that didn't invite further questions. Jacob found himself stepping forward before he'd made the conscious decision to do so. "The Carlson spread might suit your needs. It borders my family's ranch to the north. Good water, decent grass, and the house is still sound. Just needs some work." She turned to him fully then, and up close he could see details he'd missed from across the platform. A small scar at the corner of her left eyebrow. The way her eyes were flecked with gold among the green. The determined set of her jaw that suggested she was used to fighting for what she wanted. "Your ranch?" she asked. "The Redford place. About 10 miles northwest of here. Jacob Redford," he said, extending his hand. She looked at his hand for a moment as if making a decision, then took it. Her grip was firm, her skin soft but not pampered. Eleanor Vaughn. Eleanor. The name settled into his mind like it had always belonged there. "Miss Vaughn," he said, "if you'd like, I could show you the Carlson property. As a neighbor, I have an interest in who moves in next door." "That's very kind, Mr. Redford, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time." "No imposition at all. I was heading that direction anyway. This was a lie, but it came out smooth as truth. She studied him for a moment, and he had the feeling she was seeing more than he intended to show. Very well. When would be convenient? Tomorrow morning? I could meet you here at 8? 8 o'clock, she agreed. Then, with a nod to Thompson, she left, the bell above the door chiming her departure. Thompson whistled low. That's something you don't see every day. Eastern woman, from the sound of her, looking to buy ranch land alone. Mark my words, Jake. There's a story there. There was indeed a story, Jacob thought, and somehow, impossibly, he was becoming part of it. That night, he told his father about Eleanor Vaughn. Vaughn, Samuel mused. Boston Vaughns, maybe. There's money there. Old shipping money, if I recall right. You think she's running from something? Aren't we all? Samuel replied. The question is whether she's running from or running to. There's a difference, and it matters. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that made the desert look like a painting, all bold strokes and vivid colors. Jacob arrived at the general store early, had Tempest saddled and a second horse, a gentle mare named Sage, ready for Eleanor. She arrived precisely at 8, wearing a riding habit that, while clearly expensive, showed signs of wear. She knew how to ride then. Good. That would make things easier. Miss Vaughn, he greeted her. Mr. Redford, I appreciate you taking the time. They rode out of town in companionable silence at first, the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust that hung in the still air. Jacob found himself stealing glances at her, noting the straight line of her back, the confident way she held the reins. You ride well, he observed. My father insisted all his children learn. He said you never knew when a skill might prove useful. Wise man. He was, she said, and the past tense hung between them like a confession. The Carlson property was about 5 miles from town, nestled in a valley with a year-round creek running through it. The house stood on a rise, adobe walls gone gray with neglect but still solid. The barn needed work, and the corrals were overgrown with tumbleweeds, but the bones of a good ranch were there. Carlson left 2 years ago, Jacob explained as they surveyed the property. His wife died of fever, and he couldn't bear to stay. Went back to Missouri, last I heard. Eleanor dismounted and walked to the creek, kneeling to test the water with her fingers. It's cold. Spring-fed? Partly. There's also runoff from the mountains, but the spring keeps it flowing even in dry years. She stood, brushing dust from her skirts, and looked around with an appraising eye. How many head could this land support? Depends on the year, but comfortably, maybe 200, 300 if you're careful about rotation. And the neighbors? Besides yourself? The Hendricks to the east, they run sheep. To the west is open range. South is my land. She nodded, processing this information. Then, surprising him, she asked, Why are you helping me, Mr. Redford? You don't know me. It was a fair question, and one he'd been asking himself. Maybe not, he said carefully, but sometimes you recognize something in a person, even if you can't name it. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw that she understood. Whatever had passed between them on that platform, she'd felt it too. I should tell you, she said. I'm not what you might expect. I'm not some Eastern lady playing at ranching. I mean to make this work. I never thought otherwise. And I'm not looking for a husband, she added, her chin lifting slightly as if expecting an argument. I didn't offer, he replied mildly, though something in his chest tightened at her words. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. Good. Then we understand each other. They spent the next hour walking the property, Jacob pointing out the good and bad points with honest assessment. The well needed cleaning but was deep enough. The soil in the eastern section was good for growing feed. The northern boundary would need new fencing before winter. Why here? He asked finally. Why Willow Springs? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, looking out over the valley. Have you ever felt like you were suffocating, Mr. Redford? Like the walls of your life were closing in and you had to escape or die trying? Can't say I have, he admitted. Then you're fortunate. She turned to him. I need space to breathe, to be something more than what others have decided I should be. This place, it feels like possibility. He understood that. The lure of possibility, The promise of the frontier where a person could remake themselves into whoever they had the courage to become. It's hard work, he warned. Harder than you might imagine. The heat, the isolation, the constant struggle against the land, it breaks a lot of people. I'm not easily broken. Looking at her, at the steel beneath the silk, he believed her. They rode back to town as the sun reached its zenith, the heat shimmering off the desert floor in waves. At the general store, Eleanor dismounted and handed him Sage's reins. Thank you, Mr. Redford. You've been very helpful. Will you take the property? I need to think about it. Make some calculations. She paused. Might I? That is, if I have questions about ranching, might I consult with you? I'd pay for your time, of course. No payment necessary. Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we survive. She studied him for a moment. Neighbors, she repeated, as if testing the word. I think I'd like that. She went into the store, and Jacob rode home, his mind churning with everything that had been said, and more importantly, everything that hadn't. Eleanor Vaughn was a mystery wrapped in an enigma, dressed in brown cotton and carrying secrets like stones in her pockets. But she was also real, present, no longer just a vision on a platform, but a woman with plans and determination and a smile that made his heart do complicated things. That evening, his father asked about the ride. She's interesting, Jacob said, aware of how inadequate the word was. Interesting, Samuel repeated, amused. Son, when a man describes a woman as interesting in that tone of voice, she's usually a lot more than that. She's complicated. The best ones always are. Your mother could have had an easy life in St. Louis, married that banker's son, had servants and silk dresses and afternoon teas. Instead, she chose this. He gestured at the ranch, the land, the vast sky. Never did figure out if that made her brave or crazy. Both, maybe. Probably, Samuel agreed. He coughed then, a harsh rattling sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. The medicine was helping, but it wasn't curing. Nothing could do that. You should rest, Jacob said. I'll rest when I'm dead, Samuel replied, but he stood anyway, moving slowly toward his room. At the doorway, he paused. Jake? That woman, the interesting one. Don't let fear make your decisions for you. I've got a lot of regrets in my life, but your mother was never one of them, no matter how it ended. After his father had gone to bed, Jacob sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. He thought about Eleanor Vaughn, about the way she'd tested the creek water and asked about grazing capacity. She wasn't playing at ranching, she was serious about it. But why? What would drive an Eastern woman with money and options to choose this hard life? The answer, he suspected, was in what she'd said about suffocating, about walls closing in. He'd never felt that way because he'd always had the open sky above him, the endless horizon to ride toward. But he could imagine it, the weight of expectations, the pressure of being forced into a mold that didn't fit. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild chorus. It was a lonely sound but also defiant, a declaration of existence in a world that would rather they didn't exist. Maybe that's what Eleanor was doing, howling into the night, declaring her existence on her own terms. The thought made him smile. 3 days later, Eleanor Vaughn bought the Carlson property. Jacob heard about it from Thompson, who seemed equal parts impressed and scandalized that she'd paid cash, counting out bills from a leather satchel like it was the most natural thing in the world. The whole town was buzzing with speculation. Who was this woman? Where had her money come from? What was she running from, or to? Jacob found himself defending her to the skeptics at the saloon, though he barely knew her himself. She's got a right to buy land same as anyone, he told Bill Hendricks, who was holding court at the bar with his theories about Eastern women and their delicate constitutions. Mark my words, she'll be gone before winter, Hendricks said, taking a long pull from his whiskey. First cold snap, first time a calf dies or a well runs dry, she'll be on the next train back to wherever she came from. You don't know that, Jacob said, surprised by the heat in his voice. Hendricks laughed. Getting sweet on her already, are you? Can't say I blame you. She's a looker, that's for sure. But looking good and working a ranch are two different things. Jacob left before he said something he'd regret, but Hendricks' words gnawed at him. Not the part about getting sweet on Eleanor, that was already a lost cause, but the doubt about her staying power. The frontier had a way of breaking people who came with romantic notions about wide open spaces and freedom. Reality had sharp edges out here. Still, when he saw her wagon loaded with supplies heading toward the Carlson place, her place now, he found himself following at a distance. She'd hired 2 men from town to help with repairs, the Vasquez brothers, who were good with their hands and didn't ask too many questions. Smart choices, both of them. He didn't approach, not wanting to seem like he was checking up on her, but he watched from a ridge as she directed the unloading, pointing out where things should go, examining the repairs needed on the barn. She moved with purpose, no wasted motion, no standing around waiting for someone else to make decisions. Whatever else Eleanor Vaughn was, she wasn't afraid of taking charge. That evening, she appeared at his door. Jacob had just finished dinner, a simple meal of beans and cornbread that he'd gotten used to cooking for himself and his father. Samuel had retired early again, the medicine making him drowsy. When the knock came, Jacob assumed it was one of the hands with a problem, but when he opened the door, there she stood wearing a practical dress and boots that already showed dust from her new land. "Miss Vaughn," he said, trying not to sound as surprised as he felt. "Mr. Redford, I apologize for coming unannounced, but I have a proposition for you." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Please, come in. Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be welcome, thank you." He led her to the kitchen, acutely aware of how bachelor rough the house looked. His mother would have been mortified by the dishes in the sink, the layer of dust on the mantel, the general air of masculine neglect. But Eleanor didn't seem to notice or care, taking a seat at the scarred wooden table as if she'd sat there 100 times before. "What's this proposition?" he asked, pouring coffee from the pot that stayed warm on the stove all day. She wrapped her hands around the cup, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I need to learn. About ranching, I mean. I can read all the books in the world, but that won't teach me what I need to know. I need someone to show me. And you want me to teach you? I'll pay you for your time, whatever you think is fair." He shook his head. "I told you, neighbors don't charge for helping. This would be more than neighboring help. I need to learn everything. How to judge cattle, how to read the weather, how to doctor a sick horse, how to manage hands. I need years of knowledge in months. Why the hurry?" She was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee. "Because I have to succeed. Failure isn't an option for me." There was something in her voice, a desperation carefully controlled but still present, that made him want to ask more. But he'd learned that pushing too hard too fast was a good way to spook both horses and people. "All right," he said, "but not for pay. You help me with my father when he needs it, and we'll call it even." She looked up, surprised. "Your father?" "He's sick, has been for a while. Some days are harder than others, and an extra pair of hands would be helpful." "I'm not a nurse." "Neither am I, but we make do." She considered this, then nodded. "Agreed. When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning, dawn." "Wear something you don't mind getting dirty." She smiled, that radiant smile that seemed to light up the rough kitchen. "Mr. Redford, everything I own is already dirty." After she left, Jacob stood in the doorway watching her ride away, her back straight despite what must have been an exhausting day. His father's voice came from behind him. "Pretty thing, isn't she? You should be sleeping." "I'll sleep better knowing my son isn't going to let opportunity ride away into the sunset." Samuel moved to stand beside him, following his gaze. "She's got spine, that one." "How do you know?" "Because she came here alone, at night, to ask for what she needed. That takes courage. Or desperation. Maybe both." "Usually is," Samuel agreed. He coughed, covering his mouth with a handkerchief that came away spotted with blood. He tried to hide it, but Jacob saw. "The medicine's not working, is it?" "It's buying time," Samuel said. "That's all I wanted. Enough time to see you settled." I am settled." "No, son, you're existing. There's a difference." The next morning, Eleanor arrived before dawn, just as the eastern sky was beginning to pale. She wore men's trousers and a cotton shirt, her hair braided back, looking nothing like the elegant woman who'd stepped off the train weeks ago. Yet somehow she was even more beautiful like this, stripped of pretense, ready to work. "First lesson," Jacob said, handing her a pitchfork. "Mucking stalls." She took the tool without complaint, I suppose you have to start somewhere. Actually, you never stop. Even when you've got hands to do it, sometimes you've got to pitch in. Ranch work doesn't respect anybody's dignity. They worked side by side in the barn, Jacob showing her the proper technique, how to save her back, where to pile the soiled straw. She was a quick learner, asking questions, but not too many, watching his movements and mimicking them. When one of the horses, a temperamental stallion named Thunder, kicked at his stall door, she didn't flinch. "He always this friendly?" she asked. "He's testing you. Horses are good judges of character. They know when someone's afraid." "Are you afraid of anything, Mr. Redford?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about lying, giving some glib answer about being fearless, but something about the early morning intimacy of the barn, the way the light slanted through the gaps in the boards, made him honest. "Lots of things. Losing the ranch, watching my father die slowly, never mattering to anyone beyond these borders." She stopped working, leaning on her pitchfork. "You matter." "To whom?" "To your father. To your men. To this land." She paused, then added quietly, "To me." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge or a promise. Before Jacob could respond, she went back to work, but he saw the flush on her cheeks, the way she avoided his eyes. They moved on to the cattle, Jacob explaining the different breeds, how to spot illness, which ones were good for breeding and which were better for beef. Eleanor took it all in, occasionally taking notes in a small leather book she kept in her pocket. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked as they watched the herd grazing in the morning light. "My father, mostly, some from experience. You make mistakes, you learn." "What was your biggest mistake?" He thought about it. "Thinking I had time, always thinking there would be more time." She looked at him sideways. "Time for what?" "Everything. Anything. Time to learn from my father before he got sick. Time to build something bigger than what we have. Time to—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Time to live instead of just survive?" Something like that. They were interrupted by Pedro riding up fast, dust clouding behind his horse. "Senor Jake, your father, he's asking for you." Jacob's heart clenched. He looked at Eleanor. "I have to go." "I'll come with you." They rode hard back to the house, finding Samuel on the porch, struggling to breathe. His lips had a blue tinge, and each breath was a battle. Doc Morrison was already there, must have been summoned by one of the hands. "Not much I can do," the doctor said quietly. "Make him comfortable." Jacob knelt beside his father's chair, taking his hand. It felt fragile, like bird bones wrapped in paper. "I'm here, Pa." Samuel's eyes focused with effort. "The woman. Is she here?" Eleanor stepped forward. "I'm here, Mr. Redford." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "You'll do," he said finally. "You'll do just fine." Then to Jacob, "Don't waste time, son. There's never as much as you think." Those were his last coherent words. He lingered for 3 more days, drifting in and out of consciousness, Jacob never leaving his side. Eleanor was there too, helping without being asked, bringing food Jacob couldn't eat, sitting with Samuel when Jacob needed to step outside and rage at the sky. On the 3rd night, as a thunderstorm rolled across the valley, Samuel Redford died with his son's hand in his, and Eleanor Vaughn singing softly, a hymn from her childhood that seemed to ease his passing. The funeral was well attended. Samuel had been respected in the community, one of the first settlers who'd helped build Willow Springs from nothing. People came from miles around, bringing food and condolences and stories about the man Jacob was only now realizing he'd never fully known. Eleanor stood beside him at the grave, a steady presence in a world that suddenly felt unmoored. When everyone else had gone, she remained. "I should go," she said finally. "You need time alone." "No," he said, the word coming out more forcefully than intended. "Please, stay." They sat on the porch as the sun set, not talking, just existing in the same space. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "My father died 2 years ago," she said. "Heart failure," the doctors said, but I think it was really disappointment. He'd built a shipping empire, you see. Started with 1 boat and ended with a fleet. But none of his sons survived to adulthood, and his daughter, well, I was a poor substitute for the heir he'd wanted. You were his daughter. That should have been enough. She smiled sadly. Should and was are different things. When he died, control of the company was supposed to pass to me. But there were conditions, restrictions. A board of men who thought they knew better, who wanted to manage me like I was another asset in the portfolio. So you left. So I left, took what money was mine outright, and came west, where nobody knew the Vaughn name or cared about shipping routes and board meetings. She paused. I'm not just playing at this, Jacob. I need to succeed here because I can't go back. There's nothing to go back to. He understood then, the desperation he'd sensed in her. She'd burned her bridges, chosen freedom over security, the unknown over the suffocating known. You'll succeed, he said with a certainty that surprised him. How can you be so sure? Because you're too stubborn to fail. She laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her, bright and unexpected in the gathering darkness. Is that a compliment? Out here it is. The days following the funeral fell into a pattern. Eleanor would arrive at dawn, and they'd work together until dusk. She learned to rope cattle, to mend fences, to read the sky for weather changes. Her hands grew calloused, her skin browned from the sun, and the eastern polish wore away to reveal something stronger underneath. But it wasn't all work. There were moments, plenty of them, when Jacob would catch himself watching her, marveling at the way she'd adapted, at her determination to master every skill he taught, and sometimes he'd catch her watching him, her expression unreadable but intense. One afternoon, while fixing a broken gate, she asked, "What will you do now? With the ranch, I mean, now that your father's gone." "Keep it running. It's all I know." "But is it what you want?" Nobody had ever asked him that before. Want had always seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. There was what needed to be done, and that was that. "I want to build something that lasts," he said finally. "Something more than just getting by season to season. Maybe expand the herd, improve the breeding stock. My father was content to maintain what we had, but I think we could do more." "We?" He flushed, realizing his slip. "The ranch. I meant the ranch could do more." "Of course that's what you meant," she said, but there was a teasing note in her voice that made his heart skip. As summer gave way to early fall, Eleanor's ranch began to take shape. The Vasquez brothers had repaired the barn and reinforced the corrals. She'd bought a small herd of cattle, good stock that Jacob had helped her select at considerable expense. But more than that, she was becoming part of the community. The initial skepticism was giving way to grudging respect as people saw how hard she worked, how she didn't put on airs or expect special treatment. "You've got them talking," Jacob told her one evening as they sat on her porch, watching her new cattle graze. "Good talking or bad talking?" "Both, but more good lately. Mrs. Patterson says you're tougher than you look." High praise from Mrs. Patterson. "It is, actually." They were comfortable with each other now, able to sit in silence or talk for hours. Jacob found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about his mother's death, about his fears of inadequacy, about dreams he'd barely admitted to himself. And she told him about Boston, about the gilded cage she'd escaped, about the suitor her father had chosen for her, who saw her as a decoration rather than a person. "His name was Whitmore," she said one night when the stars were particularly bright. "Harrison Whitmore. His family was in banking, very powerful, very connected. My father thought it would be a good match, his money, our ships, a dynasty in the making. But you didn't want him." "I didn't want to be owned," she corrected, "and that's what it would have been." "Oh, he was charming enough, said all the right things, but I could see it in his eyes. I was an acquisition, like a painting or a thoroughbred horse, something to display and breed." The bitterness in her voice made Jacob want to reach for her hand, but he held back. There were lines they hadn't crossed yet, boundaries maintained despite the growing pull between them. "Is he still waiting for you back in Boston?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "Harrison Whitmore doesn't wait. He acquires what he wants, one way or another." There was something ominous in her tone, a suggestion of unfinished business that made Jacob uneasy. But before he could pursue it, she changed the subject, asking about the upcoming cattle drive to Santa Fe. October arrived with a cold snap that turned the mornings crisp and painted the cottonwoods along the creek gold. Jacob was preparing for the drive, his men gathering the cattle that would make the journey to market. It was a crucial time. The money from the sale would sustain the ranch through winter and into the next year. Eleanor wanted to come. Absolutely not, Jacob said when she proposed it. They were in his kitchen, going over the accounts she'd been helping him organize. Why not? I need to learn this part of the business too. It's dangerous. 2 weeks on the trail, sleeping rough, dealing with whatever weather comes, not to mention raiders, rattlesnakes, and stampedes. I'm not afraid. That's what worries me. She stood, pacing to the window. You can't protect me from everything, Jacob. I can try. She turned to face him. I don't need protection. I need to be taken seriously. How can I run a ranch if I don't understand every aspect of it? This is different. Because I'm a woman? Because He stopped, catching himself before he said too much. Because you what? He met her eyes, seeing the challenge there, the demand for honesty. Because I care what happens to you. The words hung between them, a confession that changed the very air in the room. Eleanor's expression softened. I care what happens to you too, she said quietly. But that doesn't give either of us the right to make decisions for the other. She was right, and he knew it. Fine, but you stay close to me or Pedro at all times. No heroics. Agreed. The cattle drive began on a Monday morning, 50 head of prime beef moving slowly north toward Santa Fe. Jacob's crew consisted of himself, Pedro, Tom, and 2 other hands, plus Eleanor. She rode sage, wore practical clothes, and had tied her belongings in a bedroll just like the men. If anyone thought it was strange having a woman along, they kept their opinions to themselves. The first days were uneventful, even pleasant. The weather held clear, the cattle moved easily, and Eleanor proved herself capable of keeping up with the demanding pace. She took her turn at night watch without complaint, learned to read the cattle's mood, and even managed to make better coffee than Tom, which earned her considerable favor among the men. It was on the 4th night that things went wrong. They'd made camp near a grove of juniper trees. The cattle settled for the night. Jacob had taken the first watch and was just about to wake Pedro for the second when he heard it, horses approaching fast from the south. He grabbed his rifle and moved toward the sound, heart pounding. Raiders were always a possibility on these drives, men who saw easy profit in stolen cattle and weren't particular about who got hurt in the taking. Wake the others, he told Pedro quietly, but keep it calm. Don't spook the herd. The riders appeared at the edge of the firelight, 5 men, armed and dangerous looking. But it was the man in front who made Jacob's blood run cold. He was well-dressed, too well-dressed for the trail, with the bearing of someone used to getting his way. Gentlemen, the man said, dismounting with casual arrogance, I'm looking for someone. A woman. Goes by the name Eleanor Vaughn. Jacob kept his face neutral even as his mind raced. No women here, friend. Just cowboys and cattle. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come now, Mr. Redford. Mr. Redford, I have it on good authority that Miss Vaughn was seen leaving town with your drive. I've come a long way to find her, and I'm not leaving empty-handed. And you are? Harrison Whitmore, her fiancé. Jacob felt something cold and sharp twist in his gut. Behind him, he sensed movement, Eleanor emerging from her bedroll, but he didn't turn. Like I said, no women here. Whitmore's smile widened. Eleanor, darling, I know you're there. Come out and let's discuss this like civilized people. Eleanor stepped into the firelight, her chin raised defiantly. She'd grabbed her rifle, Jacob noticed, and held it with comfortable familiarity. Harrison, I thought I made myself clear in Boston. You left without a word. That's hardly making yourself clear. The fact that I left should have been clear enough. Whitmore took a step toward her, and Jacob moved to intercept. The lady doesn't seem interested in your company. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. This is between my fiancé and me. I'm not your fiancé, Eleanor said coldly. I never agreed to marry you. Your father agreed. The contracts were signed. My father is dead, and his contracts died with him. Whitmore's expression hardened. You took money that wasn't yours. The board wants it back along with you. You can come willingly, or... He glanced meaningfully at his armed companions. Or what? Eleanor raised her rifle. You'll shoot me? Drag me back to Boston by force? How will that look in the society pages? Accidents happen on the frontier, Whitmore said softly, menacingly. Cattle drives are dangerous. People get hurt, even killed. Your cowboy friend here, for instance, would be a shame if something happened to him. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jacob saw Pedro and the others spread out, hands on their weapons. The cattle, sensing tension, began to stir restlessly. You're making a mistake, Jacob said quietly. You're outnumbered, and we know this territory. Ride away now and nobody gets hurt. Whitmore laughed. Outnumbered? I have 20 more men waiting just over that ridge. One signal from me, and this becomes very unpleasant. Jacob couldn't tell if he was bluffing, but it didn't matter. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into violence at any moment. It was Eleanor who broke the stalemate. She lowered her rifle and walked toward Whitmore, her movements deliberate and controlled. All right, Harrison, you win. Eleanor? No? Jacob started, but she held up a hand. I won't have bloodshed on my account. She looked at Whitmore with undisguised contempt. I'll come with you, but on one condition. You leave these men and their cattle alone. You ride away and never come back here. Whitmore's smile was triumphant. Of course, darling, I'm not a barbarian. Eleanor turned to Jacob, and in her eyes he saw something that made his heart stop. Not surrender, but determination. She was planning something. Take care of my ranch, she said, until I return. Eleanor. She moved closer, ostensibly to hand him her rifle, and whispered, Trust me. Watch for my signal. Then she walked to Whitmore's horse, her back straight, every inch the Boston lady she'd once been. Whitmore mounted behind her, his arm going around her waist possessively. Gentlemen, he said mockingly, tipping his hat, a pleasure doing business with you. They rode off into the darkness, Whitmore's men falling in behind them. Jacob stood frozen, his mind racing, trying to understand what Eleanor's plan might be. We're going after them, right? Tom asked. Give it a minute, Pedro said, his weathered face thoughtful. The senorita is clever. She has something in mind. They didn't have to wait long. A gunshot rang out, followed by shouting and the sound of horses scattering. Without hesitation, Jacob mounted Tempest and rode toward the chaos, his men behind him. He found Eleanor standing over Whitmore, who was on the ground clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His men were struggling to control their spooked horses. Eleanor had fired into the air and caused a minor stampede. You shot me! Whitmore gasped, incredulous. No, Eleanor corrected calmly. You were showing me your gun, how careless I'd been to travel without proper protection. It went off accidentally. These things happen on the frontier, as you said. Jacob dismounted, moving to Eleanor's side. She was trembling slightly, but her voice remained steady. Mr. Whitmore was just leaving, she said. Weren't you, Harrison? Whitmore struggled to his feet, his face twisted with pain and rage. This isn't over. You can't just... I can, and I have, Eleanor interrupted. You'll ride back to Boston and tell the board that I died out here. Tragic accident, just like you threatened. They'll write off their losses and move on. Because if you don't, if you ever come near me or anyone I care about again, I'll send them the letters. What letters? The ones detailing your embezzlement from the company. Did you think I didn't know? My father may have been blind to your true nature, but I wasn't. I have proof, Harrison. Enough to ruin you completely. Whitmore went pale beneath his pain. You're bluffing. Try me. They stared at each other for a long moment, a lifetime of conflict condensed into seconds. Finally, Whitmore looked away. Get me on my horse, he told his men. As they prepared to leave, he looked back at Eleanor. You could have had everything. I have everything I want, she replied, and her hand found Jacob's, their fingers intertwining. Whitmore's gaze followed the gesture, his expression bitter. A ranch in the middle of nowhere and a cowboy. You've fallen far, Eleanor. No, Harrison, I've risen. He rode away then, his men supporting him in the saddle, disappearing into the darkness from which they'd come. Jacob and the others watched until they were gone, then turned to Eleanor. The letters? Jacob asked. Oh, they're real. Hidden in a bank vault in Denver. My insurance policy. She swayed slightly, and Jacob caught her. "You magnificent, terrifying woman," he said. And then, because he couldn't help himself, because they'd almost lost everything, because she was there and whole and his to hold, he kissed her. The kiss lasted only seconds but changed everything. When they pulled apart, Eleanor's eyes were wide with surprise, and Jacob immediately started to apologize, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't you dare apologize for that," she said softly. Around them, the men pretended to be very interested in checking the horses and securing the camp, giving them a moment of privacy in the vast openness of the night. Pedro began issuing orders in Spanish, his voice carrying a note of amusement as he directed the others to gather the scattered supplies from Whitmore's hasty departure. "We should get back to camp," Jacob said, though every part of him wanted to stay right here, holding her under the endless stars. "The cattle will be restless after all that commotion." Eleanor nodded but didn't move away from him immediately. "Jacob, what I said to Harrison about having everything I want." She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "You were under duress." "I understand if you didn't mean—" "I meant every word," she interrupted, her voice fierce. "I just need you to know that this, whatever this is between us, it's not about needing protection or finding security. I could have had those things in Boston." "Then what is it about?" She looked up at him, and in the moonlight her eyes seemed to hold entire galaxies. "It's about choosing the life I want with the person I want. It's about freedom, but not being free from something, being free with someone." Before Jacob could respond, Tom's voice carried across the darkness. "Boss, we got company coming. Riders from the north this time." Jacob tensed, his hand going to his gun, but Pedro called out, "It's okay, Jefe. It's Sheriff Morrison and some men from town." Indeed, 6 riders appeared, led by the sheriff who looked thoroughly irritated at being dragged from his bed for a midnight ride. "Redford, what in the hell is going on out here? We had reports of gunfire and a woman being abducted." "Misunderstanding, Sheriff," Eleanor said, stepping forward with remarkable composure for someone who'd just faced down her would-be captor. "Mr. Whitmore, an acquaintance from Boston, had some confusion about property rights. We've cleared it up, and he's headed back east." Morrison looked skeptical. "That blood on the ground suggests it was more than a conversation." "Accidental discharge," Eleanor said smoothly. "Mr. Whitmore was unfamiliar with frontier firearms. He'll be more careful in the future, I'm sure." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then looked at Jacob. "This true?" "Every word," Jacob confirmed. "Man came here making threats, left with his tail between his legs and a lesson learned. Nothing more to it." Morrison sighed. "Miss Vaughn, you've been here what, 3 months? And already causing more paperwork than the rest of the valley combined." "I do apologize for the inconvenience, Sheriff." "No, you don't," Morrison said, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. "Just try to keep your Boston problems in Boston from now on." After the sheriff and his men left, grumbling about lost sleep and crazy Easterners, the camp finally settled back to some semblance of normal. But sleep was elusive for everyone. The men took turns on watch, guns loaded and ready, though they all sensed that Whitmore was truly gone. His kind of cowardice didn't return once it had been exposed. Jacob found Eleanor sitting by the dying fire, a blanket around her shoulders, staring into the flames. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You should sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "I can't. My mind won't stop spinning." She paused, then asked, "Do you think he'll really stay away?" "You seemed pretty convincing with those letters." She smiled slightly. "My father taught me to always have insurance. He just never imagined I'd use his lessons against the life he'd planned for me." "Tell me about him, your father." Eleanor drew the blanket tighter. William Vaughn was a force of nature. He built his shipping empire from nothing, through sheer will and brilliance. He could negotiate deals that left everyone thinking they'd won while he walked away with the prize. I admired him, feared him, loved him, and sometimes hated him all at once. Sounds complicated. Everything about my family was complicated. My mother died when I was young, and father never remarried. He poured everything into the business and his children. When my brothers died, scarlet fever took James when he was 12, and typhoid got Robert at 15. Father transferred all his ambitions to me. That must have been overwhelming. It was suffocating. Every decision I made, every word I spoke, every dress I wore was measured against whether it would benefit the company. I wasn't Eleanor. I was the Vaughn heir. Even choosing Harrison wasn't really about me. It was about merging two dynasties. But you walked away from all of it. Ran away, more like it, she said with bitter honesty. In the dead of night, with only what I could carry and access to accounts father had put in my name. Not very brave, was it? Jacob turned to face her fully. Are you joking? Eleanor, you left everything you knew, everyone you knew, and came to a place where you had to learn everything from scratch. That's not running away. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. When I saw you on that platform that first day, I thought I was imagining things. This feeling that I knew you, had always known you, even though we'd never met. I felt it too, Jacob admitted, like the world suddenly made sense in a way it never had before. Does that frighten you? Terrifies me, he said honestly, but my father told me not to let fear make my decisions for me. Smart man. He would have liked you. He did like me. He told me I do. Jacob smiled, remembering. High praise from Samuel Redford. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire die to embers. Around them, the night sounds of the prairie created a symphony of crickets and distant coyotes and the occasional restless stirring of cattle. It was peaceful in a way that Boston, with its gas lamps and carriages and constant human noise, could never be. What happens now? Eleanor asked finally. After the drive, I mean. We sell the cattle, come back home, prepare for winter. That's not what I'm asking. Jacob knew it wasn't, but he was buying time, trying to find the right words for something that felt too big for words. Eleanor, I'm just a rancher. I don't have much to offer beyond hard work and uncertain prospects. I'm not asking for offers. I'm asking what you want. You, he said simply. I want you. In my life, in my home, in my future. But wanting and deserving are different things. Eleanor turned to face him fully, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Jacob Redford, you listen to me. You're twice the man Harrison Whitmore could ever be. You're honest and kind and strong in ways that have nothing to do with physical strength. You looked at me, really looked at me, and saw who I am, not what I represent or what I could bring to a merger. So don't you dare talk about deserving. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. I want the man who taught me to muck stalls without making me feel foolish, who trusted me to make my own choices even when he was afraid for me, who stood between me and danger tonight without hesitation. She reached up, touching his face. I want the man who kissed me like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever prayed. This time, when Jacob kissed her, there was no interruption, no audience, just the two of them and the dying fire and the vast wilderness that had brought them together. It was a kiss that promised everything: partnership, passion, a future neither of them could fully imagine but both desperately wanted. When they finally parted, breathless and changed, Eleanor smiled. So, Mr. Redford, you were telling me about preparing for winter? He laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie. Marry me. The words came out unplanned, surprising them both. Eleanor's eyes widened. What? Marry me, he said again, more certain now. Not because you need protection, or because it's proper, or because of any reason except that I love you and can't imagine a life without you in it. We've known each other 3 months. We've known each other forever, he countered. You felt it too, on that platform, like recognizing something you'd been looking for your whole life. Eleanor was quiet for so long that Jacob began to fear he'd ruined everything. Then she said, Yes? Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, you impossible, wonderful man, but on one condition. Anything. We combine the ranches, equal partners in everything. I didn't come out here to become someone's property, even yours. I wouldn't want it any other way. She kissed him again, sealing the bargain, and Pedro's voice drifted from the darkness. About time, Jefe. We were starting to wonder if you'd ever get around to it. The rest of the drive to Santa Fe took on a different quality after that night. The men treated Eleanor with a mixture of respect and protective affection, having fully accepted her not just as part of the drive, but as part of their extended family. She continued to pull her weight, working alongside them during the day, but at night she and Jacob would find time to sit together, planning their future in quiet conversations that stretched until dawn. Santa Fe appeared on the horizon like a dream of civilization, its adobe buildings glowing gold in the afternoon sun. The cattle market was bustling with buyers from all over the territory, and Jacob was pleased to get a better price than expected for their herd. The economy was growing, beef was in demand, and the quality of their cattle spoke for itself. While Jacob handled the sale, Eleanor explored the town, returning with supplies and news. "There's talk of the railroad extending further south," she told him. "If it comes through Willow Springs, land values will triple." "And more people will come," Jacob said, not entirely happy about the prospect. "Change isn't always bad," Eleanor pointed out. "More people mean more market for beef, better prices, maybe even a school eventually." "A school?" She blushed slightly. "For future considerations." The implication hung between them, another promise of the life they were building together. They were married in Santa Fe 3 days later, in a small chapel with whitewashed walls and a bell that had hung there since the Spanish founded the town. Pedro stood as Jacob's witness, grinning broadly, while Tom gave Eleanor away with surprising solemnity. The priest spoke the words in both English and Spanish, binding them together before God and the small gathering of their trail crew. Eleanor wore a simple white dress she'd found in a local shop, nothing like the elaborate gown she would have worn to marry Harrison Whitmore in Boston. But when Jacob saw her walking toward him, sunlight streaming through the chapel windows to set her hair ablaze with copper fire, he thought she'd never looked more beautiful. "You sure about this?" he whispered when she reached him. "Never been more sure of anything in my life," she whispered back. The ring Jacob slipped onto her finger had been his mother's, a simple gold band that Samuel had kept in a leather pouch for years. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears when she recognized its significance. "Now you're really stuck with me," Jacob said as they walked out of the chapel as husband and wife. "Good thing I'm stubborn," Eleanor replied, and their laughter echoed off the ancient walls. The journey home was different from any cattle drive Jacob had ever made. This time, he wasn't just returning to a ranch, he was bringing his wife home. The men rode ahead at times, giving the newlyweds privacy, though there was much good-natured teasing around the campfires. "Never thought I'd see the day Jake Redford got himself hitched," Tom said one evening, "especially not to a Boston lady who can outshoot him." "I can't outshoot him," Eleanor protested. "Not yet," Pedro said with a wink. "Give it time, senora." As they neared Willow Springs, Eleanor grew quiet. Jacob noticed her nervousness increasing with each mile. "What's wrong? What if the town doesn't accept this? Us? It's one thing for me to be the strange Eastern woman trying to ranch. It's another to be your wife." "Let them talk," Jacob said. "We'll be too busy building our empire to care." But as it turned out, the town's reaction was more positive than either had expected. Mrs. Patterson was the first to visit, bringing a cake and her approval. "About time someone made an honest man out of Jacob Redford," she declared. "And you, my dear, have certainly proven you belong here." Others followed, bringing gifts and congratulations. Even Bill Hendricks, who'd predicted Eleanor would flee at the first sign of trouble, admitted he'd been wrong. "You've got grit, Mrs. Redford," he said, the new name still strange on everyone's tongue. "That counts for a lot out here." The real work began after the honeymoon period ended. Combining 2 ranches was more complicated than either had anticipated. There were legal matters to sort out, boundaries to adjust, and decisions about which structures to maintain and which to abandon. They decided to make Jacob's ranch house their home, as it was larger and more established, but kept Eleanor's barn, which was newer and better positioned. "We'll need to expand the house," Eleanor said one morning, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, surveying their domain. "Another bedroom or 2, a proper study, maybe a larger parlor for when we entertain." "Entertain?" Jacob raised an eyebrow. "This is a ranch, not a Boston mansion. Welcoming. Besides," she added with a smile, "we'll need the room eventually." The implication was clear, and Jacob felt his heart skip. They'd been married only a month, but already the future seemed to be rushing toward them, full of possibilities they were only beginning to imagine. Winter came early that year, November bringing snow that blanketed the valley in pristine white. The combined ranch was ready for it, hay stored, cattle moved to sheltered pastures, wood stacked high against the cold. Jacob and Eleanor settled into a routine that felt both new and ancient, as if they'd always been together, working side by side. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried, and on a cold December morning, a letter arrived that would test everything they'd built together. Eleanor found it when she went to town for supplies, waiting at the post office like a coiled snake. The envelope bore a Boston postmark and the seal of Whitmore and Associates. She opened it with trembling fingers, Jacob reading over her shoulder. "My dear Eleanor," it began in Harrison's distinctive handwriting, "I trust this letter finds you well in your rustic paradise. I write to inform you that certain irregularities have been discovered in your father's estate. It seems substantial funds are missing, funds that rightfully belong to the company's creditors. The board has authorized me to recover these assets by any means necessary. Unless you return to Boston immediately to resolve this matter, I will be forced to take legal action that will extend to your new husband's properties as well. You have 30 days to respond. Yours in anticipation, Harrison Whitmore." Eleanor sank into a chair, the color draining from her face. "He can't do this. The money I took was mine." "Was it?" Jacob asked gently. "Legally, I mean?" She was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "It's complicated. Some of it was definitely mine, but some... Father moved money around constantly, keeping it fluid. I took what I thought was fair, but proving it in court would be difficult. How much are we talking about?" "Enough," she said quietly. "Enough that if we had to pay it back, we'd lose everything." Jacob felt the weight of the threat settling on his shoulders. They'd combined their resources to improve the ranch, invested in better breeding stock, expanded the operation. They were stretched thin financially, counting on next year's sales to solidify their position. If Whitmore came after them now... "We'll fight it," he said firmly. "With what? We can't afford lawyers who could stand against the Whitmore legal team." "Then we'll find another way." Eleanor stood, pacing to the window. Outside, snow was falling again, soft and relentless. "I should go back, face them alone." "This is my mess, not yours." Jacob crossed to her in 2 strides, turning her to face him. "Eleanor Redford, you listen to me. There is no your mess or my mess anymore. There's only our life, our problems, our solutions. We face this together or not at all. But the ranch is just land and cattle. We can always start over if we have to, but I won't lose you to that man's schemes." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "What do we do?" "First, we write to that bank in Denver. Get those letters about Whitmore's embezzlement. Then we contact Judge Miller in Santa Fe. He owes me a favor from years back. Maybe he can advise us on the legal standing. And if none of that works, then we make our stand here. Possession is 9/10 of the law, especially on the frontier. Let Whitmore try to take what we've built. He'll find it's not as easy as he thinks." They spent the next days preparing their defense. Eleanor wrote to Denver, requesting the documents be sent to Judge Miller. Jacob reached out to neighbors, building a network of support. The community rallied around them, understanding that this was about more than one couple's fight. It was about whether Eastern money could reach into their world and take what had been earned through sweat and determination. Sheriff Morrison paid them a visit, his expression grim. "Had a telegram from Boston. They're sending federal marshals to enforce a court order if you don't comply." "Federal marshals?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "On what grounds?" "Interstate commerce violations, apparently, claiming stolen funds were transported across state lines." Morrison spat tobacco juice into the snow. "It's bull, and we all know it, but the law's the law." "You'll have to enforce it," Eleanor said quietly. Morrison looked at her for a long moment. "Ma'am, I'm just a local sheriff. Federal matters are outside my jurisdiction. Might take me a while to understand exactly what's federal and what's not. Might take me a real long while." His meaning was clear. He'd delay as long as possible, but eventually the federal authority would prevail. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Eleanor said, "I have to go back." "Eleanor, not to surrender, to fight. but on their territory with their weapons, papers and lawyers and boardrooms. That's a battlefield I understand. You're not going alone. Jacob, you don't understand that world. You'd be a fish out of water in Boston. Then I'll learn to swim, he said firmly. We're partners, remember? Equal partners in everything. She turned in his arms, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You'd leave the ranch? Come to Boston? I'd follow you to hell if that's where you needed to go. Boston might be worse, she said with a watery laugh. They made their plans carefully. Pedro would manage the ranch in their absence, with Tom and the other hand supporting him. The cattle were settled for winter, and if they were gone a month or two, the operation could continue. You sure about this, Jefe? Pedro asked as they prepared to leave. I'm sure about her, Jacob replied. Everything else is negotiable. They took the train east, a reversal of Eleanor's original journey. As the prairie gave way to forests and then to cities, Jacob watched his wife transform. The closer they got to Boston, the more she became the Eleanor Vaughn of her past. Spine straighter, speech more formal, the Eastern Polish returning like armor. By the time they reached Boston's South Station, she looked every inch the shipping heiress, despite the simple traveling dress she wore. You're still you, Jacob reminded her as they disembarked into the chaos of the city. I'm who I need to be, she corrected. That's what Father taught me. Be whoever the situation requires. Boston was everything Jacob had imagined, and worse. The buildings pressed in from all sides, blocking the sky. The air smelled of coal smoke and too many people. The noise was constant, carriages, voices, factory whistles, a cacophony that made him long for the prairie's silence. Eleanor had wired ahead to lawyers she trusted, old family friends who'd been pushed aside by Whitmore's influence, but who still had connections. They met in a small office overlooking the harbor, the smell of salt water mixing with leather and old paper. It's worse than you know, the lead lawyer, Mr. Carrington, said without preamble. Whitmore's been consolidating power since your father's death. He controls the board completely now, and he's convinced them that recovering the funds you took is essential to the company's survival. That's ridiculous, Eleanor said. The company is profitable. Was profitable. Whitmore's been making risky investments, borrowing against future earnings. If even one deal goes bad, Carrington shrugged. He needs someone to blame for the potential collapse, and you're convenient. So this isn't really about the money I took? It's about covering his own failures. If he can paint you as a thief who destroyed your father's legacy, no one will look too closely at his management. Jacob had been quiet throughout the meeting, but now he spoke. What about those embezzlement documents Eleanor mentioned? Carrington's eyes sharpened. You have proof of Whitmore's embezzlement? Eleanor nodded. Letters, receipts, records father kept. He suspected something but died before he could act on it. Where are these documents? A bank in Denver. I can have them sent. Do it immediately. With those, we might not just defend against Whitmore's claims, we might be able to turn the tables entirely. The next weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering. Documents were retrieved, statements taken, allies quietly recruited from among board members who'd grown uneasy with Whitmore's leadership. Eleanor navigated it all with a skill that left Jacob in awe, playing the game of Boston society with ruthless precision. But it was Jacob who provided the crucial breakthrough. At a society dinner they attended to gather intelligence, he found himself talking to an elderly gentleman who mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd been surprised to see Whitmore selling property that had belonged to Eleanor's father. Selling property? Jacob probed carefully. Oh yes, several warehouses down by the docks. Said it was to raise capital for expansion, but it seemed odd selling assets that were fully paid for. Jacob shared this information with Eleanor and Carrington, who investigated immediately. What they found was damning. Whitmore had been selling company property and pocketing the proceeds, using elaborate paperwork to hide the transactions. This is it, Carrington said excitedly. This is enough to destroy him, but we need to present it carefully, to the right people, at the right time. The confrontation came at a board meeting 3 days before Christmas. Eleanor had demanded the right to address the board, and Whitmore, confident in his position, had agreed. He sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, smirking as Eleanor entered with Jacob and Carrington. Gentlemen, Eleanor began, her voice carrying the authority of her father's daughter. "You've been told I stole from this company. The truth is, I took only what was rightfully mine, and I can prove it. More importantly, I can prove that Harrison Whitmore has been systematically destroying my father's legacy for his own gain." What followed was a masterclass in corporate warfare. Eleanor and Carrington laid out the evidence piece by piece: the embezzlement, the secret property sales, the risky investments hidden from the board. With each revelation, Whitmore's support crumbled, board members who'd backed him suddenly finding urgent reasons to distance themselves. But Whitmore wasn't finished. As the meeting devolved into chaos, he stood, pointing an accusatory finger at Eleanor. "You think you've won? You abandoned this company, abandoned your responsibilities. You ran off to play frontier wife with your cowboy. You have no right to stand here and lecture us about legacy." Eleanor stood as well, and in that moment, Jacob saw both the Boston heiress and the ranch woman she'd become merged into something stronger than either alone. "You're right," she said, surprising everyone. "I did abandon the company because I saw what it was becoming under influences like yours, corrupt, hollow, focused on profit over principle. My father built this company to connect people, to build something lasting. You've turned it into a machine for your own enrichment." She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. "I'm not asking to run the company. I'm asking you to save it from the man who's destroying it. The evidence is before you. The choice is yours." The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Whitmore was removed from his position, his assets frozen pending investigation. As he was escorted from the building, he passed Eleanor and Jacob in the hallway. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied calmly. "Go home, Harrison. Find whatever peace you can. But know that if you ever come near me or my family again, I won't be as merciful as I was today." After he was gone, Eleanor sagged against Jacob, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation finally wavering. "It's done." "You were magnificent," he said, meaning it. "I was terrified." "That makes it even more magnificent." The board offered Eleanor her father's position, or at least a place on the board with significant influence. She turned them down without hesitation. "My life is in New Mexico now," she told them, "but I have a proposal. Use the funds recovered from Whitmore's embezzlement to establish a trust, one that provides loans to Western businesses, particularly those run by women. Call it the William Vaughn Pioneer Fund." The board agreed, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of genuine respect for Eleanor's vision. Either way, it was done. The past had been faced, the threats neutralized, and the future secured. The train ride back to New Mexico felt like emerging from a strange dream. As Boston's crowded streets gave way to open countryside and then to the vast expanses of the West, Jacob watched the tension gradually leave Eleanor's shoulders. She'd maintained her composure throughout their time in the city, but now, as familiar landscapes appeared outside their window, she finally allowed herself to truly breathe. "You know what I didn't miss about Boston?" she said, leaning against him in their private compartment. "The way everyone watches everyone else, waiting for any sign of weakness. It's exhausting, being on guard every moment." "You handled it perfectly," Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I have to admit I'm glad to be heading home." "Home," she repeated softly. "Strange how a place I've known for less than a year feels more like home than the city where I spent my entire life." They arrived at Willow Springs on a clear January morning, the sun reflecting off snow-covered mesas with brilliant intensity. Pedro was waiting at the platform with the wagon, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile when he saw them. "Welcome back, Patrona," he said, helping Eleanor down from the train. "The ranch has missed you." "How are things?" Jacob asked, though he could see from Pedro's relaxed demeanor that all was well. "Good. Very good. The cattle are fat and happy, no losses to speak of. Tom fixed that section of fence that was worrying you, and Senora Patterson has been by 3 times with food, convinced we were all starving without the Patrona here to civilize us." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and free in a way it hadn't been in Boston. "I'll have to thank her, and Pedro, thank you for taking care of everything." "It is my honor, Senora. But I'm glad you are back. The ranch, it needs its heart." The ride to the ranch was quiet, both Jacob and Eleanor absorbed in the landscape they'd feared they might lose. Every familiar landmark, the twisted juniper that marked the halfway point, the red rocks where eagles nested, the creek running clear despite the winter cold, felt like a blessing. When they crested the final rise and the ranch spread out before them, Eleanor made a small sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "I was so afraid we'd never see this again." "We're not that easy to get rid of," Jacob said, but he understood her emotion. During the darkest moments in Boston, when Whitmore's threats had seemed insurmountable, he too had wondered if they'd lost everything. The house was warm, a fire already crackling in the hearth thanks to Pedro's foresight. Their bedroom was exactly as they'd left it, down to the book Eleanor had been reading still open on the nightstand. It was as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting for their return. That first night back, they made love with a desperate tenderness, each touch an affirmation that they were here, together, safe. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Eleanor said, "I need to tell you something." Jacob tensed, wondering what other secret from her past might emerge. But she placed his hand on her stomach, still flat but carrying new meaning. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "I realized it in Boston but didn't want to tell you until we were home." Jacob stared at her, a dozen emotions washing through him at once. Joy, fear, wonder, and something deeper, a sense of rightness, of completion. "A baby?" "A baby," she confirmed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "Eleanor, there aren't words." "When?" "Late summer, I think. August, maybe early September." A child. Their child. Growing up on this land under these endless skies. Jacob had imagined it, dreamed it, but the reality was overwhelming. "We'll need to expand the house, like you said." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "That's your first thought? Construction?" "No, my first thought is that I love you more than I knew was possible. My second thought is that our child deserves a proper nursery." They began planning that night, sketching out additions to the house, discussing names, imagining the future with a fervor that would have seemed presumptuous just months ago. The threats from Boston were behind them, the ranch was thriving, and new life was coming. It seemed almost too perfect, and perhaps that should have been a warning. Spring arrived early that year, the snow melting by late February, revealing green grass that promised good grazing. The cattle had wintered well and several cows were pregnant, promising to expand their herd. Eleanor, despite morning sickness that lasted well into afternoon, threw herself into ranch work with renewed energy. "You need to rest," Jacob told her for the 100th time as he found her helping Tom repair a gate. "I need to be useful," she countered, though she did set down the hammer. "I spent too many years being decorative. I won't go back to that, even pregnant." It was an ongoing negotiation between them, finding the balance between protecting her health and respecting her need for purpose. They compromised. She would handle the books, manage the household, and take on lighter tasks, but no heavy lifting or dangerous work. The community embraced news of the pregnancy with enthusiasm. Mrs. Patterson appointed herself unofficial guardian of Eleanor's health, appearing regularly with nutritious meals and advice. The other ranch wives visited more frequently, sharing their own experiences and quietly assessing whether this Eastern woman truly understood what she was facing. "Frontier birthing ain't like what you probably knew in Boston," Martha Hendricks said bluntly during one such visit. "No fancy doctors, no hospital, just Doc Morrison if we're lucky, and Midwife Jenkins if we're not." "I understand," Eleanor said calmly. "I've made my choice about where I want to raise my children." "Children?" Martha's eyebrow rose. "Plural? You haven't even had the first one yet." Eleanor's hand went to her growing belly. "Jacob wants a large family, so do I." "Well, we'll see if you still feel that way after the first one arrives," Martha said, but there was approval in her tone. This Eastern woman had spine. As spring turned to summer, the ranch prospered. The combined lands were more efficient than either property had been alone, and the improvements they'd made with Boston money, before Whitmore's threats had emerged, were paying off. They had better breeding stock, improved irrigation, and solid contracts for beef sales. But in July, with Eleanor heavy with child and the summer heat oppressive, trouble arrived in an unexpected form. Jacob was in the far pasture checking on the pregnant cows, when Tom rode up fast, his face grim. "Boss, we got a problem. There's a man at the house says he's from the government. Something about land rights. Jacob's blood chilled. They'd been so focused on threats from Boston that they hadn't considered problems from other directions. He rode hard back to the house, finding Eleanor on the porch with a thin man in a dusty black suit who looked like an undertaker who'd gotten lost. "Mr. Redford," the man said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm Samuel Hutchins from the Federal Land Office. There's been a complaint about the legitimacy of your land claims." "What complaint? These lands have been in my family for 20 years. Your lands, perhaps, but the Carlson property your wife purchased? There are questions about whether Carlson had the right to sell." Eleanor struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her back. "I purchased that property legally with proper documentation." "From Carlson, yes. But it seems Carlson may have acquired it through fraudulent means. There's a prior claim from the Martinez family saying the land was stolen from them." Jacob knew the Martinez family. They'd been in the valley even longer than the Redfords, their grant dating back to Spanish colonial times. But they'd never mentioned any claim to the Carlson property. "This is the first we're hearing of it," Jacob said carefully. Hutchins shrugged. "Claims can lie dormant for years before someone decides to pursue them. The fact is, if the Martinez claim is valid, your wife's purchase is void and the land reverts to them. And if we dispute it, then it goes to federal court. Could take years to resolve. In the meantime—" Hutchins paused, and something in his expression made Jacob deeply uneasy. "In the meantime, the land would be held in trust. No improvements, no cattle grazing, no use at all. It would cripple them. They'd integrated the two properties so thoroughly that losing access to Eleanor's land would mean losing half their grazing, half their water access. They'd have to sell off most of the herd, probably at a loss." "What do you want?" Eleanor asked bluntly, recognizing a shakedown when she saw one. Hutchins looked offended. "I'm simply informing you of the situation, ma'am. Of course, if the Martinez family were to withdraw their claim, this would all go away." After Hutchins left, promising to return in a week for their response, Jacob and Eleanor sat in stunned silence. They'd fought so hard against threats from the east, only to face new ones from unexpected directions. "I'll talk to old Miguel Martinez," Jacob said finally. "We've always been good neighbors. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." But when he rode to the Martinez ranch, he found Miguel apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Jacob. It's not my choice. My nephew Carlos, he's been talking to lawyers, digging up old papers. He says we have a right to that land, that it was stolen from us 40 years ago." 40 years ago? "Miguel, that's before any of us were here." I know. But Carlos, he's ambitious, sees dollar signs, and legally—" Miguel shrugged helplessly. "The old Spanish grants are complicated. Maybe he's right, maybe not. But he won't back down." Jacob returned home to find Eleanor in tears, not from sadness, but from frustration. "We finally get free of Whitmore, and now this? It's like the universe won't let us just live our lives." "We'll figure it out," Jacob said, though he wasn't sure how. "We always do." The solution came from an unexpected source. 3 days later, Eleanor was going through her father's papers. She'd brought some documents back from Boston, thinking they might contain useful business information, when she found something interesting. "Jacob, look at this." "What?" She held up a letter, yellowed with age. "It's from my father to someone named Martinez, dated 15 years ago." Jacob read the letter, his eyes widening. William Vaughn had apparently invested in a failed silver mine operation run by Diego Martinez, Carlos's father. The investment had gone bad, but instead of calling in the debt, Vaughn had forgiven it in exchange for any and all claims to properties in the Willow Springs Valley, Jacob read aloud. "This is it. This proves the Martinez family gave up any claim to the Carlson property. Will it hold up legally? Only one way to find out." They presented the letter to Hutchins when he returned, along with their own lawyer from Santa Fe who'd made the journey at their urgent request. The lawyer, a sharp young man named Davidson, examined everything and pronounced it valid. "This clearly shows the Martinez family relinquished claims to the disputed property," Davidson said. "Any current claim is null and void." Hutchins looked disappointed, which confirmed Jacob's suspicion that he'd been hoping for a bribe to make the problem go away. But faced with clear documentation, he had no choice but to withdraw the federal challenge. Carlos Martinez was furious, accusing them of forging documents, but his uncle Miguel confirmed the story. "Your father did take that money from Vaughn," he told Carlos. "I told him then it would come back to haunt us." The crisis passed, but it left Jacob and Eleanor shaken. They'd assumed that once they dealt with Whitmore, they were safe, but now they understood that challenges could come from any direction. "Maybe we should have stayed in Boston," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on the porch, her hand resting on her enormous belly. "At least there, the threats were predictable." "Do you mean that?" She considered, then shook her head. "No. Despite everything, I'd rather face uncertainty here than suffocation there." Her labor began on a sweltering August night, the air so still it seemed to press down on the house like a weight. Jacob had been prepared for this moment for weeks, had rehearsed what he would do, but when Eleanor's water broke and she cried out in pain, all his preparation evaporated. "Get Doc Morrison," she gasped, between contractions, "and Mrs. Jenkins, and Mrs. Patterson. Get everyone." Jacob sent Tom racing to town while he stayed with Eleanor, holding her hand as the contractions intensified. She was magnificent in her pain, fierce and determined, refusing to give in to fear even as the hours stretched on. Doc Morrison arrived just after dawn, looking tired but competent. "First babies take their time," he said, examining Eleanor. "Everything looks normal. Just gotta be patient." Patient was the last thing Jacob felt. Every cry from Eleanor was a knife in his gut. Every contraction a reminder of his helplessness. He'd faced down gunmen and threats from powerful men. But this, watching the woman he loved suffer to bring their child into the world, this was true terror. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Jenkins arrived, immediately taking charge, sending Jacob out of the room despite his protests. "This is women's work now," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You'll just be in the way." So Jacob paced the porch, Pedro and Tom keeping him company, passing a bottle of whiskey between them, though Jacob couldn't stomach it. The sun climbed higher, the heat building, and still Eleanor labored. Then, just as the sun reached its zenith, a new sound cut through the air. The cry of a baby, strong and insistent. Jacob was through the door before anyone could stop him, finding Eleanor exhausted but radiant, holding a small wrinkled bundle. "A daughter," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have a daughter." Jacob approached slowly, as if in a dream, and Eleanor placed the baby in his arms. She was tiny, impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite being only minutes old. "She's perfect," he breathed, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They named her Sarah, after Jacob's mother, with Elizabeth as a middle name for Eleanor's mother. Sarah Elizabeth Redford, first of her generation to be born on the combined ranch, a child of both East and West, legacy and frontier. The community celebrated Sarah's arrival with enthusiasm. Gifts appeared on their porch, hand-sewn blankets, carved toys, practical items for baby care. It was an acknowledgement that the Redfords were truly part of Willow Springs now, their roots set deep. But parenthood brought new challenges. Sarah was colicky, crying for hours despite Eleanor's best efforts. Sleep became a precious commodity, and the ranch work still demanded attention. Eleanor struggled with the isolation more now, missing the conveniences of Boston when dealing with a sick baby in the middle of the night with no doctor readily available. "I'm failing," she confessed to Jacob one exhausted morning after being up all night with Sarah. "I thought I could do this, but I can't even keep her from crying." "You're not failing," Jacob said, taking Sarah so Eleanor could rest. "You're learning. We both are." It was Pedro's wife, Maria, who finally provided relief. She arrived one afternoon with a bag of herbs and a lifetime of knowledge about babies. "The little one, her stomach is upset," she diagnosed after observing Sarah. "This tea will help." Miraculously, it did. Sarah slept better, cried less, and Eleanor finally got enough rest to feel human again. It was a reminder that community knowledge, passed down through generations, was just as valuable as anything from Boston's finest doctors. As autumn arrived and Sarah grew stronger, more alert, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor would strap Sarah to her chest and go about her work, the baby seeming to enjoy the movement and activity. Jacob would hold his daughter while reviewing ledgers in the evening, marveling at her tiny fingers and the way she gripped his thumb with surprising strength. "She's going to be trouble," Pedro observed, watching 6-month-old Sarah trying to crawl toward a particularly interesting rock. Already she wants to explore everything. "Like her mother," Jacob said, and Eleanor laughed. "Or her father. Don't pretend you're not the one who taught me to be curious about everything on this ranch." But their domestic peace was interrupted by news from town. The railroad was definitely coming through Willow Springs, would arrive within the year. It would bring prosperity, connection to larger markets, easier travel. It would also bring more people, more competition, more change. "We need to prepare," Eleanor said, already thinking ahead. "Buy more land while it's still cheap. Expand our operations. Maybe even open a store in town, sell direct to the newcomers." "You're thinking like your father," Jacob observed. "Is that bad?" "No, it's smart, but we need to be careful not to expand too fast." They found a balance, purchasing strategic parcels of land that gave them better water access and control of key passages to town. Eleanor's business acumen, honed in Boston, proved invaluable as they negotiated deals and navigated the increasingly complex legal landscape. Winter came gently that year, the snow falling in soft, manageable amounts rather than the harsh blizzards they'd feared. Sarah experienced her first Christmas with wide-eyed wonder at the tree Jacob cut, and Eleanor decorated with ornaments she'd had sent from Boston, a blend of traditions that seemed to exemplify their life together. On Christmas Eve, as Sarah slept in her cradle and snow fell quietly outside, Eleanor and Jacob sat by the fire, reflecting on the year. "Did you imagine this?" Eleanor asked. "When you saw me on that platform, could you have imagined all this?" "No," Jacob admitted. "This is better than anything I could have imagined. Even the parts where people keep trying to take everything from us. Even those parts, because we faced them together." Eleanor moved to sit in his lap, something she hadn't done since before Sarah was born. "I have something to tell you." Jacob's heart skipped, recognizing her tone. "Again?" "Again," she confirmed, smiling. "This time, maybe you'll get that son to carry on the Redford name." "I don't care what we get," Jacob said, pulling her close. "As long as you're both healthy." "Liar, you want a son to teach all your ranching ways." "I'll teach Sarah too. She's already showing interest in the horses. She's not even walking yet, but she watches them. I can tell she's going to be a natural rider." They talked late into the night, planning for their growing family, for the ranch's future, for the changes the railroad would bring. Neither of them mentioned the threats they'd faced, from Whitmore, from the land dispute, from the countless small crises that came with frontier life. Those were in the past, lessons learned, battles won. But as Jacob would reflect later, the past has a way of reaching into the present when you least expect it. The letter arrived in late January, just as Eleanor was beginning to show with their second child. It was addressed to her in a feminine hand she didn't recognize, postmarked from Denver. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper with just a few lines. "Mrs. Redford, I believe you should know that Harrison Whitmore has not forgotten his humiliation. He has allied himself with certain interests in Denver who would very much like to control the railroad routes through New Mexico. Your ranch sits on crucial land. Be careful. A friend." There was no signature, no way to trace who had sent the warning. Eleanor showed it to Jacob, and they spent a sleepless night discussing what it might mean. "Maybe it's nothing," Eleanor said without conviction. "Someone trying to scare us." "Maybe," Jacob agreed, but he started wearing his gun again, even around the ranch. And he noticed things. Strangers in town asking questions, riders on the distant ridges who disappeared when approached. Small things that might mean nothing, or might mean everything. The answer came in March when a delegation arrived from Denver. 3 men in expensive suits accompanied by a familiar figure, Harrison Whitmore, looking prosperous and dangerous. "Mrs. Redford," Whitmore said with mock courtesy. "How lovely to see you again. And this must be your daughter. She has your eyes." The implied threat in his observation of Sarah made Jacob's hand move to his gun, but Eleanor touched his arm, warning him to stay calm. "What do you want, Harrison?" she asked directly. "Simply to make you an offer," one of the Denver men said. "We represent the Mountain Pacific Railroad Company. We're interested in purchasing your ranch for our planned depot and stockyards." "It's not for sale," Jacob said flatly. "Everything's for sale at the right price," the man continued. "We're prepared to offer you 5 times what the land is worth." It was a staggering amount, enough to make them wealthy by any standard. They could buy land elsewhere, start over without any financial worries. "No," Eleanor said simply. "You should consider carefully," Whitmore said. "The railroad is coming whether you cooperate or not. You can either profit from it or be crushed by it." "Is that a threat?" Jacob asked. "It's a reality," Whitmore replied. "The world is changing. The frontier is ending. Men like you, Redford, cowboys and ranchers, you're becoming obsolete. The future belongs to those who understand progress." "And you think you understand progress?" Eleanor asked. "You understand greed, Harrison. You understand manipulation and corruption. But progress? Real progress? That's about building something that lasts, creating a community, leaving something better for the next generation." She stood, despite being 6 months pregnant, and faced him with the same fierce determination she'd shown in Boston. "We've built something here. Not just a ranch, but a home, a family, a place in this community. You can't buy that, and you can't take it." Whitmore's expression darkened. "You always were too idealistic for your own good. Very well, but don't say you weren't given a choice." After they left, Jacob and Eleanor stood together, watching the dust from their carriage settle. "It's starting again," Eleanor said quietly. "Then we'll fight again," Jacob replied. "As many times as it takes. I'm tired of fighting." "I know, but the alternative is giving up everything we've built." Eleanor placed her hand on her belly, where their second child grew. "They're not getting our home. They're not taking our children's inheritance." "No," Jacob agreed. "They're not." The battle lines were drawn once more, but this time they weren't facing it alone. Word spread through the valley about the railroad's attempt to force them out, and the community rallied. Other ranchers who'd received similar offers banded together, forming an association to negotiate collectively with the railroad. "They want to divide us," Bill Hendricks said at a meeting in the Redfords' barn. "Pick us off one by one, but if we stand together, we've got a chance." It was ironic, Jacob thought, that Hendricks, who'd been so skeptical of Eleanor at first, was now one of their staunchest allies. But that was the way of the frontier. Adversity either broke people apart or forged them into something stronger. The spring of 1883 brought more than just wildflowers to the valley. It brought surveyors with their strange instruments, measuring and marking, reimagining the land in terms of profit and progress. Jacob watched them from horseback one morning, Sarah secure in front of him on the saddle, her small hands clutching the horn as she'd seen her father do. "Men?" she asked in her limited 2-year-old vocabulary, pointing at the surveyors. "Yes, sweetheart. Men who want to change things." "Bad men?" Jacob considered this. "Not bad exactly, just different. They see the land differently than we do." Eleanor was in the house, heavily pregnant and on bed rest after a scare the previous week when she'd started bleeding. Doc Morrison had ordered complete rest, a prescription that chafed against every instinct Eleanor possessed. Jacob found her propped up in bed with ledgers spread across the quilts, pen in hand. "You're supposed to be resting," he said, setting Sarah down to toddle toward her mother. "I am resting. I'm in bed, aren't I?" Eleanor lifted Sarah onto the bed beside her, wincing slightly at the movement. "Besides, someone needs to review these contracts Davidson sent. The railroad's latest offer has some interesting language hidden in paragraph 12. "What kind of language?" "The kind that would give them mineral rights to our land in perpetuity, regardless of whether we maintain ownership of the surface rights." Jacob took the contract, reading the section she indicated. The wording was deliberately obscure, buried in legal terminology that would be easy to miss. "They're trying to steal from us even while pretending to buy from us." Harrison's touch, I'd guess. He always did like to hide his true intentions in subclauses. A knock at the door interrupted them. Pedro entered, his face grim. "Patron, we have trouble. Someone cut the fence along the eastern boundary. About 30 head of cattle are missing. Jacob felt his jaw tighten. It had started. The pressure campaign they'd expected. Any tracks? See, heading toward the railroad camp, but they'll say the cattle wandered through a broken fence, no proof of theft. Stay here, Jacob told Eleanor, strapping on his gun belt. I'll handle this. Jacob, be careful. This is what they want. To provoke you into doing something rash. He kissed her forehead, then Sarah's. I know, but we can't let them think we're weak either. The ride to the railroad camp took an hour. It had sprung up 5 miles from town, a collection of tents and hastily built structures housing the workers who were laying track toward Willow Springs. Jacob found the camp foreman, a burly Irishman named O'Malley, supervising the unloading of rails. Redford, O'Malley greeted him warily. What brings you here? Missing cattle. Trail leads this direction. O'Malley's expression didn't change. Haven't seen any cattle. My boys are too busy working to rustle cows. Mind if I look around? Actually, I do. This is railroad property. You'd need permission from the company representatives. And where might I find them? O'Malley pointed to a more substantial building at the camp's edge. Mr. Whitmore and his associates are reviewing plans, but I wouldn't disturb them if I were you. Jacob ignored the warning, dismounting and striding toward the building. He pushed through the door without knocking, finding Whitmore and 2 other men bent over a large map spread across a table. The map showed the valley, with various parcels marked in different colors. The Redford Ranch was outlined in red. Redford, Whitmore said, straightening. How uncivil of you to enter without permission. Like cutting my fences and stealing my cattle? I don't know what you're talking about, though I did hear something about cattle wandering through a damaged fence. Unfortunate, but these things happen. Animals aren't known for respecting property lines. The other men watched with interest, clearly enjoying the confrontation. One of them, older with silver hair and cold eyes, spoke up. Mr. Redford, is it? I'm James Thornton, senior representative of Mountain Pacific. Perhaps we can resolve this amicably. I want my cattle back. Of course. If they're found on railroad property, they'll be returned. For a reasonable recovery fee, naturally. Can't have livestock interfering with our operations without compensation. It was extortion, plain and simple, but cleverly done. Jacob could pay their fee and get his cattle back, or refuse and lose them entirely. Either way, they won. How much? Oh, shall we say $10 a head? Seems fair for the inconvenience. $300 for his own cattle. It was robbery, but Jacob saw the trap. If he refused, they'd claim the cattle were abandoned. If he caused trouble, they had the law on their side. Technically, the cattle were trespassing on their property. I'll need to see them first, make sure they're actually my cattle. Thornton nodded to Whitmore, who led Jacob behind the building to a makeshift corral. His 30 head were there, along with another dozen bearing the Hendricks brand. Hendricks, too? Several neighbors have had similar fence problems, Whitmore said with false sympathy. The frontier can be so unpredictable. Jacob paid the fee, knowing he had no choice, but as he drove his cattle home, his mind was working. They couldn't fight the railroad with force. They had too much power, too many resources. But Eleanor had been right. This wasn't about force. It was about intelligence, strategy, and using the enemy's weapons against them. That evening, as he told Eleanor about the encounter, her eyes lit up despite her exhaustion. Jacob, that's it. They showed you their map. So? So now we know which parcels they're targeting. We can buy them first, or at least tie them up in competing claims. With what money? We just spent most of our reserves on the eastern expansion. Eleanor smiled, the expression both beautiful and slightly terrifying. Remember the William Vaughn Pioneer Fund I had them establish in Boston? I'm still a trustee. I can authorize loans for Western development. You'd loan money to ourselves? Not to ourselves. To our neighbors. To every rancher in the valley who's willing to stand against the railroad. We'll create a web of ownership so complex that the railroad would spend years in court trying to untangle it. It was brilliant, using the very legal complications that had once threatened them as a weapon against their enemies. But it would require trust, cooperation, and secrecy. 3 things not easily found in combination. The next weeks were a delicate dance. Eleanor, despite being confined to bed, coordinated everything. Letters flew back and forth to Boston, loans were approved, and money began flowing into the valley. But it had to be done quietly, without alerting Whitmore or his associates. Jacob handled the face-to-face meetings, gathering ranchers in secret, explaining the plan. Some were skeptical, taking on debt seemed dangerous. But when Bill Hendricks signed on, others followed. "Never thought I'd be in business with a bunch of neighbors," Hendricks said, signing his loan papers. "But if it keeps the railroad from swallowing us whole, I'm in." The plan might have worked perfectly if not for betrayal from an unexpected source. Tom, who'd been with the ranch for 3 years, who'd ridden with them on the cattle drive where Eleanor had faced down Whitmore the first time, sold them out for railroad money. Jacob discovered it by accident, overhearing Tom talking to one of Whitmore's men near the saloon. The shock of betrayal hit him like a physical blow. He confronted Tom that night, finding him packing his belongings in the bunkhouse. 30 pieces of silver, Tom? That's what our friendship was worth?" Tom couldn't meet his eyes. "It's not personal, Jake. They offered me enough to buy my own spread, start fresh somewhere else. I'm tired of working for other people's dreams. You could have come to us. We would have helped you. Would you? Or would you have given me another lecture about loyalty and patience?" Tom's voice turned bitter. "It's easy for you to talk about building something together. You've got the land, the wife with money, the future all laid out. What do I have?" "You had our trust. That should have counted for something." Tom finally looked at him, and Jacob saw not just greed but genuine pain. "Trust doesn't buy land, Jake. It doesn't give a man a future." After Tom left, taking his railroad money and his shame, Jacob sat on the porch in the darkness, feeling older than his years. Pedro found him there, bringing a bottle of whiskey and silent companionship. "It hurts, the betrayal," Pedro said finally. "But it's not your fault, Jefe. Some men, they see only what they don't have, not what they could build." He told them everything, our plans, the loans, all of it. Then we make new plans. We're not defeated yet. But the damage was done. The next morning, Whitmore arrived with legal papers, injunctions preventing the land sales they'd arranged. He'd used his influence with territorial judges to block their strategy. "Did you really think you could outmaneuver us?" Whitmore asked, standing in their parlor while Eleanor, days from giving birth, glared at him from her chair. "We have resources you can't imagine." "Get out of my house," Eleanor said quietly, dangerously. "Gladly. But first, one final offer. Sell to us now, take the money, start over somewhere else, or stay and watch everything you've built crumble. The railroad doesn't need your land specifically. We can route around you. But if we do, Willow Springs dies. No market access, no prosperity, just slow strangulation." It was the ultimate threat, not just to them, but to the entire community. If the railroad bypassed Willow Springs because of their resistance, every family in the valley would suffer. After Whitmore left, Jacob and Eleanor sat in heavy silence, the weight of responsibility crushing. Sarah played at their feet, unaware of the crisis surrounding her. "Maybe we should take the offer," Eleanor said finally, the words seeming to physically pain her. "We can't be responsible for destroying the town. There has to be another way." "I'm tired, Jacob, so tired of fighting." Tears ran down her cheeks, pregnancy hormones and exhaustion combining with genuine despair. "I just want to raise our children in peace." That night, Eleanor's labor began. It was faster than with Sarah, more intense and complicated by Eleanor's emotional state. Doc Morrison looked worried as the hours passed. "She's fighting it," he told Jacob. "Her body's ready, but she's holding back like she's afraid." Jacob knelt beside the bed, taking Eleanor's hand. "I'm here. Whatever happens, we face it together." "I'm scared," she whispered between contractions. "What if we lose everything? What if our children grow up with nothing because of our stubbornness? Then they'll grow up knowing their parents fought for something that mattered. They'll know we didn't give in to bullies and thieves." "Is that enough?" "It has to be." Their son was born just after midnight, screaming his arrival with healthy lungs. They named him Samuel, after Jacob's father, carrying forward the legacy of the man who'd built the ranch from nothing. But even the joy of a healthy son couldn't lift the shadow hanging over them. The railroad's deadline was approaching: sell or be bypassed. The other ranchers were wavering, some already accepting offers rather than risk losing everything. It was Sarah who inadvertently provided the solution. 3 days after Samuel's birth, she was playing with some papers on Jacob's desk, survey maps O'Malley had dropped during a visit. Jacob was about to take them away when he noticed something. "Eleanor, look at this." She was nursing Samuel but leaned over to see. The maps showed the planned railroad route, but there was something odd about them. A section of track seemed to curve unnecessarily, adding miles to the route. Why would they do that? Eleanor wondered. Jacob studied the map more carefully, comparing it to his knowledge of the land. Then he saw it. Water. They're routing around the Hendricks property because there's no water access there. They need water for the steam engines. Eleanor's eyes widened with understanding. And the only reliable water source in that section is on our land, the creek that runs year-round. Jacob felt excitement building. They don't want our land for a depot. They need it for water rights. Without it, they'd have to haul water in, massively increasing their costs. They looked at each other, the same thought occurring simultaneously. They had leverage. The confrontation came 2 days later. Jacob called a meeting in town, inviting Whitmore, Thornton, and the railroad representatives, but also the town council, Sheriff Morrison, and Judge Miller, who'd come from Santa Fe at Eleanor's request. "Gentlemen," Jacob began, standing before the assembled group, "we've discovered something interesting about your railroad plans." He unveiled the map, explaining about the water rights. Whitmore's face darkened as he realized their scheme had been exposed. "Without access to our creek, your operational costs triple," Eleanor said, having insisted on attending despite still recovering from childbirth. "You need us more than we need you." "We can take the water rights through eminent domain," Thornton threatened. "You could try," Judge Miller interjected, "but water rights in the territory are complex, based on Spanish colonial grants that predate American law. The Redford claim, inherited through the original Carlson grant, has precedence. You'd be in court for years." It was checkmate. The railroad needed the water, and the Redfords controlled it. "What do you want?" Thornton asked grudgingly. Eleanor stood, Samuel in her arms, Sarah clinging to her skirts. "Fair price for water access. Guaranteed stops in Willow Springs for both freight and passengers. Written agreements that the railroad won't interfere with local ranching operations. And Harrison Whitmore permanently banned from any involvement in territorial business." You can't be serious," Whitmore sputtered. "I'm deadly serious," Eleanor replied. "You came here to destroy our home, threatened our community, tried to steal what we'd built. The fact that I'm offering you any deal at all is more mercy than you deserve." The negotiations took days, but eventually terms were reached. The railroad got their water rights, but at a price that would sustain the Redford Ranch for generations. Willow Springs got its depot, ensuring the town's prosperity. And Whitmore, faced with criminal charges for the cattle theft and fence cutting, slunk back to wherever men like him go when their schemes fail. The signing took place in the Redford home, papers spread across the same table where Samuel Redford had once taught his son about ranching. As Thornton signed the last document, he looked at Eleanor with something approaching respect. "You're wasted out here, Mrs. Redford. With your business acumen, you could run an empire." "I am running an empire," Eleanor replied, gesturing out the window at the land stretching to the horizon. "It just doesn't look like what you'd recognize as one." After everyone left, Jacob and Eleanor stood on the porch, their children with them, watching the sun set over their land. The ranch was secure, the future assured, the battle's finally won. "Do you think it's over?" Eleanor asked. "The fighting, the threats?" "For now," Jacob said. "Maybe for good. We've proven we can't be pushed around." "I never wanted to be a fighter." "No, but you're damn good at it when you need to be." Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "Language, Mr. Redford. We have children now." "Speaking of which," Jacob said, looking down at Sarah, who was trying to climb the porch railing, "I think this one's going to be more trouble than both of us combined." "Probably," Eleanor agreed, "but at least she'll have a place to make that trouble, a home that can't be taken away." They went inside as darkness fell, the house warm with lamplight and filled with the sounds of family. In the kitchen, Maria had left dinner warming on the stove. Pedro had stacked fresh firewood by the hearth. The ledgers on Jacob's desk showed profitable projections for the coming year. But more than any of that, what mattered was the four of them together, safe, home. The journey that had begun with a glance across a train platform had led them through trials neither could have imagined, but it had also given them more than they dared to dream. That night, as they lay in bed with the baby between them and Sarah finally asleep in her own room, Eleanor asked, "If you could go back knowing everything that would happen, would you still stop to look at that woman in green on the platform?" Jacob pulled her closer, careful not to disturb Samuel. "I'd run to that platform. I'd push people out of the way to get there faster. Even knowing about Whitmore, the threats, all of it, especially knowing because I'd also know about this, about you, about our children, about the life we've built. Eleanor, that moment on the platform wasn't chance, it was destiny." "You don't believe in destiny." "I didn't. Then I met you." Outside, a coyote howled, answered by another, their wild chorus echoing across the valley. But inside the Redford house, all was peaceful, secure, complete. The morning would bring new challenges. Ranching always did. Sarah would wake demanding breakfast and attention. Samuel would need feeding every few hours. The cattle would need tending, fences checking, endless chores that made up the rhythm of ranch life. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. The cowboy who'd gone to town for medicine had found so much more. The Eastern lady who'd fled a gilded cage had discovered freedom. Together, they'd created something that neither could have managed alone. A family, a legacy, a love story written across the harsh, beautiful landscape of the American frontier. The railroad would come through as promised, bringing change and growth. Willow Springs would prosper, growing from a frontier town to a proper city over the coming decades. The Redford Ranch would expand, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Sarah would indeed grow up to be trouble, but the kind of trouble that changed things for the better, the first woman to run for territorial office, though that was still years away. Samuel would inherit his father's gift for ranching and his mother's head for business, building on what his parents started. But all of that was still to come. For now there was just this, a family at rest after a long journey, safe in their home, surrounded by land that stretched to the horizon and love that went even further. The train platform where it all began was just 5 miles away, but it might as well have been in another lifetime. That desperate, lonely cowboy and that suffocating Eastern heiress were gone, transformed into something stronger, something that could weather any storm. "I love you," Eleanor whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," Jacob replied. "Forever and then some." The baby stirred between them, making soft sounds of contentment. From her room, Sarah called out in her sleep, already dreaming whatever dreams filled the minds of 2-year-olds. The house settled around them with comfortable creaks and sighs, a living thing sheltering the family it contained. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with all its demands and challenges. But tonight belonged to them, Jacob and Eleanor Redford, unlikely partners who'd found each other across impossible odds and held on tight, refusing to let go no matter what forces tried to tear them apart. They'd fought for this moment, this peace, this completion, and by God, they'd earned it. The coyotes continued their song outside, wild and free, a reminder that the frontier still existed just beyond their door. But inside, civilization in its best form had taken root. Not the false civilization of Boston's drawing rooms or the railroad's cold progress, but the real thing. Family. Home. Love that transcended social stations and geographical boundaries. The cowboy had indeed found his first love on a train platform and had taken her hand before she could leave again. But more than that, they'd taken each other's hands and refused to let go, walking together into a future neither could have imagined, but both had fought to create. It was, in the end, a simple story. 2 people who chose each other despite every reason not to, and in choosing, changed everything. The lamp finally burned out, leaving them in comfortable darkness. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But inside the Redford house, a different kind of light persisted, the warm glow of a love tested by fire and proven unbreakable, a beacon that would guide them through whatever came next.